Shalom and greetings, friends. Most people out there seem to think that the Christian gospel started with Jesus Christ. And in the first century CE with the New Testament, as we say, Brit Hadashah. But did you know that the one true old gospel goes as far back in the scriptures as preached to Abraham, and also to ancient Israel it was preached. And we'll see this even in the Brit Hadashah writings, as most people refer to as the New Testament. We're going to see this very clearly. And if you haven't heard anything like this before, please stay tuned with open eyes and ears and with an open heart, and make comments on this video teaching if you have any questions or comments or any scriptures you want to add to it. But I want to say first, right off the bat, I'm not saying that the gospel is just a narrow little topic. It does simply mean good news, but we can have good news about peace. We say shalom, and that's good news to have peace, isn't it? And good news to have grace, to have favor in our Creator's eyes, and to have forgiveness. There's a lot of good news that we can share, but also His commandments. We'll see as we get into this, there's a lot involved with the gospel, but it's not going to change to be something completely different that's not compatible. Yes, anything that our Creator's involved with can improve. We can see improvement in covenants, as we say, Brit Hadashah, New Covenant. Better promises we can see. We can see a lot of things improving, and perhaps you software engineers out there might understand this on a deeper level, because anything that's the same old of something, if it's improved or upgraded, we can say it's upgraded and improved, but it still must be compatible, not incompatible with the older versions or any older version, such as, say, opening up a Microsoft Word document. Now, how would you like to spend a lot of money and effort and energy into the latest version, upgraded, uploaded, downloaded, and it's not compatible with an older version document that you have? And you want to just open it up in the new version, but it's not compatible. And all this energy and time and effort and love and passion was put into an older version, but then it's not compatible. And so we can see that as somewhat of an analogy applying to the gospel. If it improves, or a covenant, if it improves, it's got to be compatible. It's one holy book here, if we believe in one holy book as the inspired word. But old versions and new versions should be compatible, as I said. And same thing with the one true old gospel. There's only one true gospel, but again, we can see different categories or subtitles under that of peace and grace and mercy and love and forgiveness, and also His commandments. His love is expressed in His Word. And so, point number one I'll get to here is the true gospel is not anti-Torah. As we say, Torah, not anti-law, or His Creator, our Creator's commandments. It's not nailed to any cross. We're going to see this really clearly. But rather, it's the same old gospel as preached to Abraham. And also, as I mentioned, Israel. Notice this in Galatians. First we'll start with the New Testament, the Brit Hadashah writings here. In Galatians chapter 3 and in verse 8, it says, "And the scripture foreseeing that God, Yah, would justify the Gentiles by faith, preached the gospel to Abraham beforehand." Before the Gentiles ever even heard the gospel. or at least had it preached on a, generally speaking here, saying, in you the nations shall be blessed, in the seed of Abraham. So then those who are of faith are blessed with believing Abraham. And of course, you can be grafted in, just like Rahab, just like Ruth, be grafted into the gospel, into the commonwealth of his people, regardless of what your race, what your skin color, your cultural background, or whatever country or continent you come from. This is opened up, as we see in the Brit Hadashah, of course. But also notice this, in Hebrews chapter 4 and verse 2 here, it says, for indeed the gospel was preached to us. This is the author of Hebrews speaking to those he's writing to, and as well as to them. And looking at that in context, he's referring to ancient Israel. But the word which they heard did not profit them, generally speaking, of course, not being mixed with faith with those who heard it. We go to Hebrews chapter 11, we see many of them who will be, we call the faith chapter. These are many Israelites that were faithful and true. So, of course, generally speaking, we have to look at the context of the word here. Also in Romans, we see in Romans chapter 10 and verse 15 and 16, it says, as it is written, how beautiful are the feet of those who preach the gospel of peace. We have shalom here. And here, actually in Romans here, Paul is quoting Isaiah 52 verse 7 here. The gospel of peace, who bring glad tidings of good things. But they have not all obeyed the gospel. Obeyed the gospel. Obedience. So beware of those who say that faith has nothing to do with obedience for salvation. Yes, we can't earn our salvation by being good and obedient. We've all fallen short of perfection, and we all deserve the death penalty by sin, as we see even in Ezekiel, the soul that sins shall die. So we all deserve that death penalty. We can't earn it by just being good or picking and choosing what we want to do and what we don't want to do. But it says here, but they have not all obeyed the gospel. For Isaiah says, and quoting him again, Lord, who has believed our report? Now, who out there really wants to believe the true report, the true gospel? Let's go back to Isaiah 57. Look at this a little bit more closely, this quote. It says, how beautiful upon the mountains are the feet of him who brings good news. Now that Hebrew word is basar. And that's a Strong's Concordance number 1319. If you want to check up on it, it can mean to preach. Good tidings or good news. And again, this is quoted in Romans. So we see, as it's used in the Greek for gospel, we can see the Hebrew word in what many refer to as the Old Testament, the Tanakh, is basar, who proclaims peace, or as we say, shalom, who brings glad tidings of good things, who proclaims salvation. Wow, salvation is a good word. It brings good news as well, especially if it's eternal salvation. Who says to Zion, your Yah reigns. He reigns, yeah. That's another good thing. So whether it be the true gospel, the same old gospel, or any other subject for that matter, we must always include Isaiah 8 verse 20 here. Notice what it says here to Isaiah 8 verse 20. This is how you check up on any gospel, Is it a true gospel or is it a false gospel? Notice here it says to the Torah. And many will say, in many translations will say to the law. To the Torah, Strong's Concordance number 8451, and to the testimony. If they do not speak according to this word, this Torah, as it says, it is because there is no light in them. So, not that any of us are perfect, but if we're not preaching something according to the Torah, the written one, and this word, well then whatever's being said, shouldn't be considered light or truth. It might be a mixture of good and evil, like the old tree in the garden. Not all, evil tree won't fool anybody, but it's got to be mixed with some good, of course. So we have to match it up to the scriptures. And of course, as it says here, the Torah, the written Torah, not just man's interpretation of it, but what's clearly, explicitly in here. So what Torah is Isaiah referring to? Well, the New Testament, the Brit Hadashah, wasn't written yet. The Mishnah and the Talmuds weren't written yet. So we got to match everybody's teachings, everybody's gospels, to what we see, what is good. What is good? I'm not talking about the negative commandments. We see that the curse of the law, as we read about in Galatians, that's referring to the negative penalties of breaking the positive, the commandments of love. Those 10 commandments all pre-existed Israel, and many did. But, these commandments all along the whole law, the whole Torah, and the prophets, it's all about loving Him with all your heart and soul and mind and physical vitality and being, and also loving your neighbor as yourself. And it's not just just anybody, but you love, even we're told to love enemies, pray for them, hope for the best, and that people will change and repent. And that's why I even record this video teaching, knowing that people who will hate it, who will hate me, will still hopefully listen to it and consider it and pray about it and be influenced by not just my words, but what's clearly in here. As expressed in 1 John, or Yochanan, his Hebrew name, his Jewish name. If you were in the 1st century, you'd call him Yochanan. John, as we say in English today, 1 John 5, verses 2 and 3, it says, by this we know that we love. Here's that word love, and he's also considered the apostle of love, the children of our Creator, the Almighty. How do we know that we love them? Well, when we love Him, it says here, when we love God, Yah, and keep His commandments, His mitzvot. And it's not just saying Jesus' commandments. Here it says God. And it says in Hebrews chapter 8, verse 13, that even Yeshua is the same yesterday, today, and forever. So, even in Malachi 4 verse 6, it says that He does not change. We can count on His character being pure and not being unpredictable, because what He expresses and what He inspires. So we can see in verse 3, 1 John 5 verse 3, now it says, for this is the love of Him. This is the love. You want the definition of that? Here it is. That we keep His commandments, His mitzvot. And His commandments are not burdensome. That means they're good. They're good news. The good news must include His commandments. They teach us peace. Let's just look at even just the 10 commandments. The first 4 are, give us how to love Him. How do you want to love Him? You don't have any other gods. You don't have any graven images. You don't take His name in vain. or, you know, in an unworthy manner. And you keep his Shabbats, not Jewish ones, not man's of any kind, but his. He says, these are my Sabbaths, my Shabbats. And which are they? And then the next 6, well, you can say the 5th one is also loving him, because honoring your parents has direct relationship to our Creator as our parent. And so you can break this off in 5 and 5 or 4 and 6, but you can break it off into those 2 great commandments, loving him and loving our fellow human beings. And they're not burdensome. When you have his mind in you, you have his heart, and he circumcises your heart, of course, they're not going to be burdensome. You're going to love them. So commandments, we see commandments equals love, equals good news. Or we can say gospel. It must be included with the gospel. And as Yeshua, he even said in Matziyahu 5 verses 17 through 19, do not think, don't even think about it, that I have come to abolish the Torah. He says, don't even think about it. Or the prophets. He hasn't come to abolish the prophets or the law or the Torah. He says, I have not come to abolish. A second time he says it. He repeats himself. I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill. I'll get to this word fulfill in a minute here. But let's continue verses 18 and 19. Get the context here. It says, for truly I tell you. He's telling you here, until heaven and earth disappear. This is the New International Version. Not the smallest letter, not even a yud in the Hebrew letter, or the least stroke of a pen will by any means disappear from the Torah until everything is accomplished. Now, is heaven and earth still here? It is for me. Yeah, well, please don't get offended. But he says, until heaven and earth pass away. In verse 19, notice this. Let's continue this. Therefore, anyone who sets aside or teaches one of the least of these commandments, which ones are the littlest? Which ones are the most insignificant to you? Whoever sets aside or teaches, who does not teach the least of these commandments and teaches others accordingly will be called least in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever practices, whoever does, and teaches these commandments, referring to the Torah here, will be called great. They will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. Now, for some reason, most of Christianity will look at just that one word for fulfill, and they'll say, well, he fulfilled it, so we don't have to, regardless of the context here. Now, that sounds illogical, but, well, let's look at that Greek word for fulfill. The Greek word is transliterated and pronounced in English as plerou. And I might have a little dialect difference there than the original, but it's Strong's Concordance number 4137. That's 4137, and it simply can mean to make complete. He came to make the Torah complete, or to preach fully, to fully preach it, or to supply it. He's coming to supply it. And it can be translated in those various ways. But why just focus on the word fulfill and say, well, now we don't have to? Let's look at that same Greek word in Colossians, in one of Paul's writings here. Colossians 1:25, it says here, same exact Greek word, says, of which I became a minister according to the stewardship of the Almighty. which was given to me for you to fulfill. It's given to Paul to fulfill the word of the Almighty here, Yah. So, because Paul fulfilled it, does that mean we don't have to? I don't see that here. Strong's Concordance number 4137. So let's do a little detective work. Let's compare it to other scriptures, and especially the context, like I said, of Matthew 5, verses 17 through 19 there. And even the context before and after that, for that matter. So therefore, the same old gospel is not anti-Torah. It's not going to teach that the law was done away with, or nailed to the cross, or abolished, but it's going to be intimately involving his commandments with the same old gospel as taught to Abraham and Israel. Notice Genesis 26 verse 5. This is what our Creator spoke to Abraham, or actually to Isaac, Yitzhak as we say in Hebrew. He says, because Abraham obeyed my voice and kept my charge, my commandments, my statutes, and his laws. Now this is about 400 years or more before the Sinai covenant. We see the Torah existed. And we can see all 10 commandments pre-existed. Cain killing Abel, that's the 6th commandment. We see the 7th day sanctified and made holy by him. We have no right to make anything holy. Only he can do that. And so we see the Torah pre-existed the Mount Sinai covenant, as many people call it. And so did the true gospel. And that's the big point here, that I hope we can realize, and we can mend all the division that has happened over the centuries, not just between Christianity and all the different denominations, but also the Jewish people. Judaism and Christianity needs to be united in the same faith, same Messiah, for both the Jew and the Gentile. One body, one hope, one faith, all together, not, segregation doctrines or teachings or gospels. So we must have an accurate biblical foundation of understanding before we can even understand what the true gospel is, and also before we can even go to Galatians, where the Apostle Shaul, also known as Paul, is warning us about other gospels, false ones. He says, I marvel at you, Galatians, you Gentiles out there, who are turning away so soon from him who called you to the grace of Messiah. Yes, grace is good news. But also, as pointing out in Romans 3:31, he says, shall we make void the Torah through faith? He says, certainly not. We establish the Torah. Now that's Romans 3 verse 31. And then you jump over to chapter 6 of Romans, verses 1 and 2. He says, shall I sin so that I can exercise grace? Is grace so that I can continue sinning? He says, certainly not. He says that's perverting that is perverting grace. That is a perversion of grace, to think that you can keep sinning, or that you can nail those commandments to the cross or do away with them. That's perverting, a perversion of grace. Read that. Romans 6 verses 1 and 2, and even in verse 3, continue with that. And so, Shaul says here, turning away so soon from him who called you to the grace of Messiah, to a different gospel. This is a different gospel than that was preached to Abraham and Israel, and also through the new covenant here. Same gospel, which is, he says, there's not another, but there are some who trouble you and who want to pervert the gospel of Messiah. And you can go to Jude chapter 3, and that's not in my notes here. It says, return to the faith that was once delivered to the saints. For those who are perverting the gospel and are perverting grace and turning it into licentiousness or license to break laws, commandments, twisting it. It was even happening in the first century among the faithful within the body of believers. So notice in verse 8 of Galatians chapter 1 here, it says, but even if Paul or any of the apostles or emissaries, even myself included, or even an angel from heaven, preach any other gospel to you than what has been preached to you by the faithful ones, the faithful gospel, let him be accursed. Whoa. That should cause us to tremble a little bit at this word if we're not following it accurately. It says, as we have said before, so now I say it again. He's repeating himself. When there's a double repeat, a double witness in the same context, that's pretty serious. He says, if anyone preaches any other gospel to you than what has been received to Abraham and Israel, and also that they were preaching faithfully in the first century, let him be accursed. Wow. So put those messiahs and teachers out there to the test. As even in Revelation chapter 2, verse 2, it says, you have tested those who say they are apostles and are not, and have found them to be liars. So it says here, it's not wrong to find people to be liars if they're not teaching the truth accurately, and it's clearly going against the word here, the scriptures. So match up the gospels. All the good news is out there. They say, oh, it's good news. You can keep sinning. You don't have to have any works. Just believe and you're saved. And you get this gospel that builds mega churches because everybody wants to feel righteous and saved without following the word the best we can. And none of us are perfect. That's why we need grace. We all fall and stumble and make mistakes. But as the Messiah said in Matthew 5, verse 48, he says, be ye perfect as our Father in heaven is perfect. Now, is that a mission impossible if you have the same spirit that he had? Well, even if you think it is, we are to be striving for perfection and striving for that. And where we fall short, that's where we need grace. We need forgiveness. Of course, absolutely. Again, as we see in Isaiah, even match up these Gospels to Isaiah 8:20. Here, it says, to the Torah and to the testimony, if they do not speak according to this word, not just the New Testament or Brit Hadashah here, this is written referring to the Tanakh also here. He says, if they don't speak according to this Torah and this word, it's because there is no light in them.